What's up, MetaNerdz? This video is all about the TIE Fighter, the Twin Ion Engine Starfighter. It was manufactured by Fleet Systems, and had some parts made by Kuat Drive Yards, the company that made most of the vehicles for the Grand Army of the Republic. They cost 60,000 credits brand new, which is 3 times the cost of a Vulture droid, but an amazing 2.5 times cheaper than an ARC 170 fighter or an X-Wing. Something that I always feel isn't appreciated about the TIE Fighter is just how big they are. At 7.5 meters or about 25 feet tall, if you landed your TIE Fighter in your front lawn, it would be taller than a 2-story house. It had a top atmospheric speed of 1,200 kilometers or about 745 miles per hour, significantly faster than the X-Wing with a top speed of only 1,050 kilometers per hour. And to have an aircraft from Earth to compare it to, an F-16 fighter jet is about twice as fast as a TIE Fighter. But it should be pointed out that one of the TIE Fighter's greatest features is that it received a top maneuverability rating according to galactic-wide standards for ships. The whole of the main cockpit here is actually made out of titanium, and the wings are actually 2 large solar arrays which are held in place by a steel frame. And the cockpit window is not made of glass, but is actually transparent steel, a wonder material that is as strong as steel, but of course transparent. What got the TIE Fighter moving was its Twin Ion engine, which also gave it its abbreviated name, TIE Fighter. The Ion engine consisted of 12 solar energy collectors, with 6 being on each wing. Each wing had a solar grid monitor, so that the pilot could make sure it was receiving enough power. These energy accumulator lines carried the converted solar energy to the Energizer, which was able to convert this heat into energy in the collection coils. Each wing had a series of 3 collection coils, and this would then pump into the high-pressure radioactive gas fuel tank. Electrons were shot into the gas, ionizing it, and forcing it out of the Ion engine. Just like a regular rocket engine, the ions shooting out of the TIE Fighter causes an equal and opposite reaction, which pushes the TIE Fighter forward. Technology like this already exists on Earth, and has been used in satellites for decades. But before you get your hopes up of NASA creating a TIE Fighter, listen to what this scientist says about how much propulsion a current ion engine can produce.
That each individual ion gives a relatively large push back on the spacecraft.
So if I'm the spacecraft, could you push me as hard as I'm going to feel from one of these thrusters?
I can try.
Okay, I'm ready. I can take it. I barely felt that.
That's right. The engine pushes on the spacecraft as hard as this single piece of paper pushes on my hand.
So I guess us Earthlings are just going to have to wait a little bit more. For the TIE Fighter's weapons, there's not too much to talk about, just a pair of LS-1 laser cannons. And if you thought that was sparse, tell it to the pilot, because the TIE Fighter also came with no shielding or any life support systems, which required the pilots to wear these large atmospheric suits, supplying them with oxygen and regulating the temperature. Everything about the TIE Fighter is optimized to be light, agile, and cheap, and so its design also negates the needing for landing gear. And although the TIE Fighter can land resting on its wings, inside of Imperial ships, TIE Fighters normally took off from racks inside of hangar bays. And while TIE Fighters were being stored, they could be hooked up to power conduits, which could keep them charged up and ready for the next mission. TIE Fighters were designed to be deployed in large numbers, and a squadron consisted of 12 fighters, with a full attack wing being 6 squadrons, for a total of 72 TIEs. TIE pilots were considered elite troopers, and had to go through significant extra training, but they were still taught to look at themselves as expendable. Other pilots in the Empire often look upon TIE pilots as suicidal, as everyone was aware that the TIE Fighter's design was simply meant to provide an overwhelming force, and the Empire didn't care about losing a couple, knowing that recruits were plenty, and TIEs were cheap. To further prevent any romanticizing of their position, TIE pilots didn't use their name, but rather an identification number, much like regular stormtroopers, and the Empire made sure that pilots didn't develop any sentimental attachments to their TIEs. TIE Fighters were often moved around from one location to the other, out for repairs, or simply just came back in different orders, and so all pilots were thought to look at TIE Fighters simply as tools, which should all be identical across the Empire. The history of the TIE actually starts 32 years before the Battle of Yavin. This is 10 years even before the start of the Clone Wars, and Sinar Systems had been producing ships that were twin ion engine, with a center round cockpit, and one of their famous ships that had this design, but was much larger, was Darth Maul's Scimitar. And over the years they realized that they should make a smaller twin ion engine starfighter, which would be easy to mass produce. Just before the breakout of the first Battle of Geonosis, in the year 22 BBY, Sinar Fleet Systems would propose their idea for a TIE starfighter, a design which was approved by the Republic, and these TIE starfighters were actually produced during the Clone Wars. The few that saw combat were quickly referred to as TIE Fighters, and when the Republic became the Empire, Palpatine decided to upgrade the Imperial Navy with these agile, but most importantly, very cheap starfighters. There were more tweaks to the design, and what we got was the TIE Fighter that we know and love today. Throughout the reign of the Empire, Sinar Fleet Systems would continue to improve and create different versions of the TIE Fighters. One of the most impressive improvements upon the TIE Fighter was the TIE Interceptor. During the Fei-Hugh campaign, T-65 X-Wings showed their superiority over TIE fighters, resulting in a loss of 286 TIE fighters, a bitter loss that accelerated the Empire's shift towards the TIE Interceptor. By the time of the Battle of Endor, more TIE Interceptors were being fielded than TIE fighters, but with the loss of the Emperor and the second Death Star, the Imperial leadership became fragmented, and Moffs and Admirals were stuck with pretty much whatever TIE fighters they had with them, with the New Republic pushing their advantage, capturing most of the Empire's major manufacturers. The New Republic actually used TIE fighters to fight off other Imperials, but they were cautious about using these around formerly Imperial-controlled planets, as for decades the TIE fighter had been a symbol of the power of the Empire, and instilled fear into billions of beings across the galaxy. For this reason, TIE fighters were mostly used by the New Republic in areas where the former Empire didn't have that big of a presence. And just to add insult to injury, the Imperial leadership that continued to fight on had to ask for the support of lesser races, non-humans, like the Sullustans, to produce new fighters that they would use, like the Preybird-class Starfighter. Well, that's it for its history, but before you go, you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind-the-scenes stuff. The TIE Fighter actually came with an ejection seat, but you'll rarely ever see a pilot use this, because they knew that if they ejected into the emptiness of space, they would most likely die from the slower and more painful death of either running out of oxygen or losing too much heat. And so instead, they were happy to go down with their ship, especially if they could take out rebels with them. TIE Fighters were originally meant to be blue, but because of blue screen technology that was used, it made the TIE Fighters invisible. Models used for A New Hope were white, in Empire Strikes Back they were gray, and then in Return of the Jedi they became an even darker gray, but had their originally intended bluish hue added during post-production. Lucas considered putting TIE Fighters into the end of Episode 3, but they decided to go with Alpha 3 Nimbus-class V-Wing starfighters, realizing that there was plenty of time in between Episode 3 and 4 for fans to believe that the Empire switched from the V-Wing to the TIE Fighter. And of course, the TIE Fighter has been in a ton of different video games, role-playing games, and there have even been plenty of people across the world who have built their own TIE Fighters or TIE Bombers. Well, that's it for the TIE Fighter. If you liked it, go ahead and hit that like button, and be sure to leave a comment down below if I missed any cool facts, or if you have a suggestion for future videos. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at MetaNerdz so you can see us build Star Wars props and cosplays, along with some other cool Star Wars stuff. If you want to help support this channel, check out the description below for our Amazon store and our Patreon. And be sure to subscribe, because we're making videos like this every single day. But more important than all that, remember, the Empire thinks both you and your ship are expendable, and the Force will be with you. Always.